Hi, this is Kyandra, and I'm presenting a meaning dependence framework to identify the structure of sense of place across social ecological landscapes. I'm excited to be sharing research with you from a paper my co-authors and I currently have in press in the journal People and Nature. Given that these conference presentations are pre-recorded, the paper may very well be available by the time of our virtual conference. Sense of place describes the wide range of connections between people and places that develops based on the place meanings and attachment a person has for a particular setting. Consider a multi-generational landowner, ranching the same land her family homesteaded over 100 years ago. To her, this landscape might be a grassland where she grazes livestock and upholds her family's legacy. It might represent her legacy and maybe her way of life. These meanings lead to a level of attachment to the land, attachment being both an emotional connection as well as the degree a person incorporates a place into their identity or sense of self. Other landowners in the same area may hold different meanings for the land they own. Perhaps these folks see their rural land as an escape from their primary residence in a nearby city. They may view the land as somewhere with beautiful scenery where they enjoy spending time with friends and family. This land may also represent their way of life. Again, these meanings produce some level of attachment. We know that sense of place can be an important aspect of well-being. Additionally, the meanings and attachment that underpin sense of place may guide how people perceive and respond to social and ecological change. The idea being that people evaluate a place change based on how compatible or threatening that change is to the meanings that inform their sense of place. Scholars like Masterson and colleagues have articulated the potential of sense of place as a promising but underutilized tool to understand the human role in social ecological systems. In our research, we were interested in using sense of place to understand how private landowners in the southern Great Plains of the United States perceive and respond to grassland transformation to degraded woodlands. The southern Great Plains is a mixed amenity working landscape where over 90% of land is privately owned. The social landscape is also shifting from a predominantly agricultural orientation to encompass landowners with broader land use preferences and motivations for owning land, such as the rural and natural amenities it may afford. The research I present today is a deep dive into sense of place as the first step in our process. We developed the meaning dependence framework to measure sense of place and applied our framework to private landowners in the southern Great Plains. We then explore the structure of sense of place based on the relationship between landowners' place meanings and their place attachment. Although place meanings are inherently place-specific, some universal categories of meanings have been identified across research contexts. They generally include place characteristic meanings focused on attributes of the biophysical setting, functional or utilitarian meanings related to actual or desired uses, interpersonal meanings based on interactions with others and the social aspects of place, and experiential meanings formed through individually oriented experiences. While place meanings are the cognitive mechanism by which sense of place forms, many landowners also have instrumental connections to the land that can be understood in terms of dependence. Typically, quantitative measures of place dependence are holistically framed around the degree to which a place is the single best place for a particular activity. This may be useful for groups with similar functional goals, but it fails to account for heterogeneity in how landowners rely on their land. Many landowners do not live on the best place to achieve their land management goals, yet this may have little effect on their dependence on the land. There have been a range of efforts to expand the applicability of place dependence, such as considering different dimensions of dependence, reconceptualizing dependence as a place meaning related to self-efficacy, and some have suggested that people are inherently dependent on a place for the meanings that they attribute to it. However, consider a wealthy landowner who uses their land as a second home with a small cattle operation leased out to their neighbor. This landowner may characterize their land as a source of income, yet indicate that they do not depend on this income. Instead, they may characterize and rely more strongly on their land as a place to escape and gain perspective on their life. Although landowners hold many meanings for their land, they may only depend on their land to realize a subset of those meanings. We've conceptualized this into the meaning dependence framework, which considers how representative a place meaning is of landowners' beliefs, and also accounts for the degree to which they depend on their land for each meaning. In this regard, place dependence may be conceptually similar to Marshall and colleagues' work on resource dependency, the idea that dependence may vary and manifest differently in economic, social, and personal aspects of one's life. As meanings become central to a person's sense of self, they produce feelings of place attachment. Although attachment is widely considered an outcome of an individual's place meanings, the common indicators for place attachment related to affect and identity are place meanings themselves. For example, my place is a source of personal pride is a common indicator for place attachment related to the self-esteem aspect of identity. As with other place meanings, a landowner may characterize their land as a source of pride. That is, the self-esteem meaning is completely representative of their beliefs. But they may indicate that they do not rely on their land as a principal source of their self-worth. Thus, they have low dependence on the self-esteem meaning. Measuring place attachment as a set of place meanings using the meaning dependence framework increases the compatibility between place meanings and place attachment measures. We reviewed a wide-ranging body of sense of place literature and private landowner research and conducted iterative qualitative interviews with landowners in our study area to develop place meaning items. Our interviews also supported the conceptualization of the meaning dependence framework. Ultimately, we used 38 place meaning items from the 4 categories of characteristic, functional, experiential, and interpersonal meanings. We really strove to create a comprehensive catalog of meanings from which landowners with potentially diverse connections to the landscape could express their sense of place. Nearly half of our place meanings were experiential, reflecting the importance and variety of this type of meaning, both in our interviews and the literature review. To measure place attachment, we used 8 commonly used indicators related to identity and affect, or emotional connection. For each of the place meaning and attachment items, we asked respondents to indicate both the degree to which the item represented their beliefs and their dependence on the land to supply the meaning. Both were measured on 5-point scales from 0, not at all, to 4, completely. We randomly selected 3,000 private landowners who owned at least 30 acres from the 53 counties in our study region. We followed a slightly modified Dillman mailing approach with 5 mailings throughout the course of the spring of 2018. We received a 35% response rate, however, only included the 535 landowners who had answered all of the place meaning and attachment items in this analysis. We added the response scores from the representativeness question and the dependence question for each place meaning and attachment item. This resulted in an overall strength of each item, now on a scale from 0 to 8. As is common with place attachment, we combined these 8 items into a single index. We used 4 complementary analyses to explore the structure of sense of place based on how place meanings relate to place attachment: correlation, regression, and 2 machine learning decision tree techniques. A regression tree analysis iteratively partitions landowners into groups that optimize reducing within group variability and maximizing between group differences. Regression trees are very useful for data exploration and description, but they tend to not be reproducible with future data. So we concluded our analysis with a random forest. This improves on the robustness of a single regression tree by generating an ensemble of trees, hence the name forest. While commonly employed for prediction, we use the random forest to identify each place meaning's contribution to explaining place attachment. In Figure A, you see that overall, landowners' levels of place attachment were moderate to slightly high, with a mean of 5.4, median of 5.8, and 50% falling between 4 and 7 on our scale, where 0 is no attachment and 8 is maximum attachment. In Figure B, you see that on average, the experiential and interpersonal meanings in purple and blue were rated the highest by landowners, while functional and characteristic place meanings in green and orange were rated the lowest. In the correlation analysis, almost all meanings were significantly and positively related to place attachment. Experiential meanings, such as way of life, freedom to decide, and perspective on life, had the strongest correlations with place attachment, followed by interpersonal meanings reflecting family heritage and belonging. Characteristic and functional meanings had the lowest correlations. Examining correlations is useful to look at individual relationships, but this ignores the reality that place attachment is simultaneously informed by multiple meanings. In the OLS regression, meanings did an exceptional job explaining place attachment. Of the 12 significant place meanings, a large portion were experiential. Way of life was most strongly related to attachment, followed by autonomy, or the freedom to decide, and being somewhere a person can reduce their stress. Besides the regression coefficients, we looked at 3 other metrics to understand the contribution of each meaning. We found that no single meaning explained a large share of the variance in place attachment, but also that place meanings were characterized by shared variance and intercorrelations. Regression demonstrates that meanings are indeed important determinants of place attachment, but the issue of shared variance makes it difficult to understand how these meanings are structured with regard to attachment. The optimal regression tree performed very well in explaining landowners' place attachment by partitioning them into 33 groups based on the specific place meanings they held. To keep things relatively simple, this visual representation illustrates the structure of the tree, but I've only included the splitting rules for a few select groups. You can read a regression tree as a series of conditions that, if met, achieve a specific outcome. For example, Path A highlights the conditions of place meanings held by landowners with the lowest levels of place attachment. They tended to not strongly believe that their land represents their way of life, held less than moderate beliefs that their place provides peace and quiet, and did not at all enjoy the process of working as much as the results. Landowners with this combination of place meanings, who believed that their land was at least a moderate source of family pride, had an average place attachment of 1.8, while those less likely to view their land as a source of family pride expressed essentially no attachment. Conversely, Path B highlights the place meanings held by landowners with the highest levels of attachment. The regression tree permits exploration of how multiple configurations of meanings can be associated with similar levels of place attachment, and also helps explain why place attachment varies. Way of life defines the first split in the regression tree, thus is important to understanding the place attachment for all landowners in the sample. Although there is some overlap, groups defined by a lower meaning for way of life tended to have lower average place attachment, whereas groups defined by stronger belief in way of life tended to have higher levels of place attachment. You see that the tree is not symmetric and contains many nonlinear splits, indicating the underlying process of forming place attachment from place meanings differs among groups of landowners. These differences are commonly explained through the concept of interactions and may also indicate mediator or moderator effects. Although the regression tree enables detailed exploration, a random forest analysis provides more robust insight into variable importance and future modeling. Again, we found that place meanings did extremely well explaining place attachment. The strongest contributor by far was way of life, followed by freedom to decide and doing work one loves. The top 10 meanings were all experiential and accounted for 80% of the sum of squares explained in the model. Functional and place characteristic meanings provided negligible contributions. Across analyses, experiential meanings reflecting personal psychological connections were predominant drivers of landowners' place attachment. Way of life and autonomy emerged as key meanings that may be central to understanding sense of place on private lands. Our findings suggest that in similar landowner samples, experiential meanings may contribute the most to high levels of attachment, while functional and place characteristic meanings may contribute least. There may be a hierarchy of place meanings, or perhaps experiential meanings mediate the relationship between functional and characteristic meanings and place attachment. We see great value in using machine learning techniques like regression trees and random forests to explore the structure of sense of place and provide complementary information to that of more traditional analyses. Our meaning dependence framework builds on existing sense of place research to account for the multiple ways meanings inform human connections to places. We applied our framework to private landowners. However, we believe it has broad applicability to capture diverse configurations of person-place relationships in other contexts. Along with insights specific to private landowners' sense of place, we hope this work provides a useful template for others interested in this concept. Improving the ability to measure and represent sense of place adds depth to our understanding of this complex phenomenon and can enhance the utility of sense of place as a tool to understand responses to social ecological change. Thank you for tuning in to my presentation. I know I covered a lot of ground, but I hope you'll check out our paper for further information, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have in the message forum or during the live Q&A session. I'd like to quickly thank my co-authors, Mike Cerise and Val Thomas, as well as the National Science Foundation for funding this research. Of course, many thanks go to all of the landowners who participated in various phases of this project. This work is the first step in our larger research endeavor to understand how sense of place relates to adaptation to changing social ecological conditions. Thanks again, and have a good day.